everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and we're going to take a look back and reflect on the stellar science fiction show Deep Space Nine and ask the question as to whether it's the greatest Star Trek series ever. Now there may be spoilers for the show throughout this video, so just beware. Now Deep Space Nine was the third television series in the iconic Star Trek franchise, following the original series from 1966, and then Star Trek The Next Generation, which ran from 1987 to 1994. And going back to the series' origins, we have to go to the early 1990s, where it was created by Rick Berman and Michael Piller, and the show itself had the huge task of following The Next Generation, which had reached a cultural institutional status with the then current Star Trek fanbase. So in order to differentiate as much as possible from that show, the creators changed the dynamic from the traditional exploration and adventure of a starship to focus on a stationary space station which consisted of multiple races dealing with their various conflicts. It also broke further ground by being the first Star Trek series to have an African American character in the lead role. This personality would come in the form of Benjamin SIsko, who would take the role as commander of the space station. The prime location of the space station is set near the planet Bajor, where the people have recently freed themselves from the brutal occupation of their planet by the race of Cardassians who originally built the station. The Bajorans invite the Federation to govern the station, and this is where we see Sisko take command. Now shortly into his tenure during a scouting trip, he discovers a stable space wormhole, which acts as a gateway for interstellar travel between the Alpha Quadrant and the distant Gamma Quadrant. Sisko comes to contact with alien beings known as the Prophets, who are the hosts of the wormhole and are also worshipped by the Bajorans as gods. Sisko is quickly anointed as the emissary of the Prophets and is kept within a close kinship with them throughout the entire series. Now the show debuted on networks on January 1993, with the first couple of seasons focusing on tensions between the Bajorans and the Cardassians, where the Bajorans want to maintain their freedom and independence, but become wary of the Federation, whose own goal is to unify all races in a peaceful coexistence. We see a lot of antagonism lying mostly with the hatred of the Cardassians, and those perspectives are seen mostly through Major Kira, who is in second of command of the station. Now the third season would see the show finally incorporate elements of exploration with the introduction of the USS Defiant starship. The fourth season would expand even further with the inclusion of the Klingons, a well-established warrior race from the previous Star Trek shows, and this is where we also saw the re-entry of Lieutenant Worf, who we all know from The Next Generation. Now the final three seasons would focus on the epic story arc of the Dominion War, where a race of changelings known as the Founders would emerge from the Gamma Quadrant and engage in a massive conflict with the Federation to assume full control of the entire galaxy. Now when looking back at Deep Space Nine, whether as a standalone series or part of the Star Trek franchise, it is an accomplished, multi-layered and ultimately compelling show. Now admittedly, it does struggle in its earlier seasons, that would start off strong in the first couple of episodes and then be deflated by less compelling entries and much more filler installments before running through for the season's conclusion. But the show would really hit its stride in later seasons, providing an assured balance of rich characterization, deeper themes and high level spectacle. And when we go back to the original question as to whether it's the greatest Star Trek series, and for me the answer is yes. I do believe that this is the best series within the franchise, and there are a multitude of reasons why. And I think one of the biggest reasons is the serialized storytelling. The show's creators deliberately intended to veer away from the standalone episodic approach of previous Star Trek shows, and that decision was absolutely integral to Deep Space Nine. Through serialized storytelling, you have events that have a long-lasting impact. Scenarios or crises or problems that take longer than 1 week to solve adds a certain substance and weight and allows for far more developed stories, as it gives you more time to map out scenarios and ensure elements make sense and follow through to their natural progression. And Deep Space Nine absolutely did this the best way. All of the scenarios that we see throughout the series, whether it's the conflict with the Dominion, the Marquis, the Cardassians, retaking the station, the emergence of the Pay-Rifes, all of these stories take multiple episodes, even multiple seasons to resolve, which keeps you compelled to see what happens. Now at times that can work to a show's detriment if the story takes too long to get going, but for the most part that doesn't happen within this show, even when we see the most substantial arcs throughout the entire season. And if done right, serialized storytelling always allows for a show to evolve and progress, and this is what should happen with a long running series. A show shouldn't be the same in season 5 as what it was in season 1. Yes, the tone can be consistent, but the story has to progress beyond the status quo. And Deep Space Nine did this so well, certainly by its 4th and 5th seasons, where we saw a shift from the more interpersonal conflicts into the larger scale battles and higher stakes and more dramatical outcomes. And this just leads to an overall greater satisfaction with a long running show. And this sense of development and progression brings us to the second biggest reason why Deep Space Nine is the best Star Trek series, and that is characterization. Simply put, Deep Space Nine has the richest and most developed characters within all of Star Trek. Now, are any of the personalities as iconic or inspirational as, say, James T. Kirk, Spock, Uhura, Picard or Data? I would say no, but they are far more textured and have much more layers and depth to them. We first, of course, have to look at Benjamin SIsko. In the beginning of the show, we see him having to witness his wife's death at the Battle of Wolf 35, his rage at Picard, obviously due to his involvement in terms of the Borg. We see him constantly conflicted with his role as emissary. We see his relationship with Jake develop through the entire show, and there's so much to this character. He's all fire and intensity and a commanding presence, and it's an immensely strong performance from actor Avery Brooks. Equally as vivid and fiery is Major Kira. Driven by her own experiences during the Cardassian occupation, we would see her conflicted by her hatred of Cardassia whilst trying to stay compelled to being a member of Starfleet and its protocols. Her beliefs in the Prophets and her overall relationship with Odo. She's an absolute firecracker of a personality, a bit of a hothead to begin with in the first couple of seasons, yet overall she turns out to be very likeable, and the series would multiple times draw on her traumatic encounters during the Bajorans' occupation to keep her sympathetic, and she's terrifically played by actor Nana Visitor. We then have Odo, the Changeling, who in the beginning as the security officer is defined by maintaining order and protocols, but we see that commitment to order fractured when he discovers his true origin, as we see him and Kira come across the Changelings for the first time in the season 3 premiere, and then we see his love for Kira over the course of the season, and these two story elements especially humanise the character throughout the following installments after. But we would also see versatility within the characters. They weren't all intense and conflicted, whether it was the likes of Bashir or Quark, who are much more upbeat, positive personalities, feeding off very much more on their charisma, and it's very important that you have that contrast in order to keep the show very interesting. This was also the case with the stunningly beautiful Jadzia Dax, a member of the Trill species, and we learn that she is the symbiote host of a previous being who has lived for hundreds of years, and she shares a strong friendship with Sisko, and we see in the first couple of seasons of how everybody has to try and adjust with her female persona. And at many times Jadzia Dax will also take the role as mentor in terms of Sisko and his overall decisions. Now, as well as the main cast, we also had a group of interesting supporting characters who at times made as big an impression in terms of their development. Whether it was the Cardassian ex-spy Enem Garak, we had the member of the Vorta known as Weenon, we had the Cardassian soldier Daymar, and then we would see Quark's nephew Nog, who had clear aspirations as to becoming a member of Starfleet, and all of these characters would go on equally interesting arcs, especially when they were connected to the Dominion War. So to then follow on from the characterization, another reason for Deep Space Nine being the best series is down to its overall villains. Once more, we're talking about some of the best antagonists that were developed through multiple episodes and seasons. Everyone from the Changelings, the Vorta, the Savage Soldiers known as the Jem'Hadar, the Revolutionaries known as the Marquis, all of these were antagonists with depth and complexity and dimensions. At times they would go against the Federation, but there would be other stages where they would be somewhat allies and also cooperate when necessary to fit their own needs. And this would constantly provide interesting scenarios where we would see heroes and villains working together. Now, in terms of the villains, we have to mention Gul Dukat, the officer of Cardassia in charge of the Bajoran occupation. This character is without question one of the best villains within all of Star Trek. Initially an indifferent presence in the earlier seasons, his role develops throughout the entire series. Throughout his relationships with Sisko and Kira, we see his decision to join the Dominion in the later half of the seasons, before striving and successfully taking over the station at the end of season 5. We then see him descend into madness after the death of his daughter Zyle. He then resurfaces later on by being possessed with the Pyrites. It's one of the best character arcs of the entire series, and thanks largely to Mark Alamo's performance, Gul Dukat is an intelligent, charismatic and very articulate villain and very watchable, and those are the key elements for any antagonist, especially ones that are sustained for multiple seasons. And Gul Dukat's journey was in keeping with the show's quality in terms of its deeper themes and subject matter. Over the course of the 7 seasons, so much focus would be on interpersonal conflict, racism, politics, war, all of its effects during, before and after, both in the physical and the psychological. We would focus on terrorism, religion, love, family, betrayal and sacrifice, loss and death. We would even tap into the higher themes of spiritual existence, destiny and fate. When you watch the series, the sheer amount of issues, messages and narratives, many episodes would warrant hours of debate and conversation after watching them. We would then talk about the aspects that the series absolutely excelled in, and that was in terms of action and spectacle. Simply put, Deep Space Nine has the most epic space battles seen in science fiction television, and for me, some of the best battle scenes seen on the screen since Return of the Jedi. Even now, the combat scenes are staggering and awesome. When we look at the significant episodes such as The Way of the Warrior, Tears of the Prophets, Call to Arms, Sacrifice of Angels, all these episodes show huge armadas of ships engaging and destroying, where both heroes and villains take in multiple losses. We even look at the more grounded battle scenes, for example the climatic end of Rocks and Shoals, where Starfleet are forced to take out the Jem'Hadar in brutal fashion. We then have the devastating climax of the siege of AR-558, where Starfleet, it seems, are literally on the brink of defeat, where we see multiple deaths and losses. This includes Nog losing his leg, and all of these scenes are every bit as impactful as the space battles, and just another example of how good the show was and able to convey battle that has ramifications and consequences. Now, in terms of the overall series, as I mentioned before, it did struggle for consistency, certainly within its first 3 seasons. Season 4 started to show a bit more expansiveness and compelling material, but it was really Season 5 and Season 6 especially where the show really hit its peak. We look in particular at the first 6 episodes of Season 6, where we were really thrust into the Dominion War storyline, where you literally are jumping into the next episode after the previous one ends to see where the story goes next, and this is very much the example of compelling serialized storytelling. This also goes the same for Season 7 and a very much anointed final chapter, where certainly the last 8 to 9 episodes build up to the conclusion of the Dominion War, and it's absolutely fantastic. And when we look at the conclusion of the series, the much revered finale, What You Leave Behind, this is where we see the Federation alongside the Klingons and Romulans ultimately defeat the Dominion to save the galaxy. We see the final confrontation between Sisko and Dukat, who is possessed by the Pay Rifes, and we see Sisko permanently residing with the Prophets at the cost of being away from Jake. Despite that particular arc not being as fulfilling as what it should have done, the finale overall is satisfying as we see Kira take command of the station, and we have those truly heartfelt moments where we have flashback scenes going back to previous episodes, and then we have that final scene where we see Kira looking outside the window alongside Jake as the wormhole appears open, and we pan it away from the screen, seeing the space station once more deep and stationary in outer space. And whilst not absolutely perfect, the finale itself is very heartfelt and ultimately definitive. Now, in terms of legacy, Deep Space Nine never reached the same level of impact and popularity as The Next Generation, primarily because it was such a shift from the traditional Star Trek. Many fans deemed it a far less optimistic vision of the franchise because of its more ambiguous themes and nature, but in many ways this is what made it a far more compelling and substantial show. Now yes, there are deconstructive elements, but if we look at it, the heroes are certainly still striving for positive goals in terms of coalition and coexistence, and this is still very much in keeping with the spirit of Star Trek, despite all of the various conflicts that compel them to change in order for the greater good. And when we come back to look at Deep Space Nine, what made it so great was its strive for change, its strive for difference. It strived to very much challenge the Star Trek franchise and its fans by very much breaking down barriers and going to places where Star Trek had never gone before and perhaps didn't want to go to, but places it certainly needed to go to. And in that aspect, along with everything else, is still for me what makes Star Trek Deep Space Nine a special series and still the greatest Star Trek show ever. So those are my overall thoughts and feelings and look back on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Where do you think it ranks amongst the overall Star Trek hierarchy? If you'd like to see me break down some of the best episodes within the entire series, also let me know within the comments and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you. And if there are any other topics or television shows or movies that you'd like to see me cover within the pop culture and entertainment scene, then also let me know within the comments and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you on that subject matter within the future. Please also hit like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves and I will see you very soon.